Joining us now for more is Maya Javandanfour, Iran lecturer at the Interdisciplinary Center Herzliya and research at the Meir Izri Center at Haifa University, joining us from Tel Aviv. But first, let's go to our Owen Alterman, who is with us in the studio. And Owen, before we dismiss these claims from Iran, it has to be said, we know the Mossad operates in Iran. Israeli leaders, including the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, even brag about that.
Yeah, we haven't been shy about that in this part of the world, Calev, in this country. But this is different. This is not assassinating a nuclear scientist, again, attributed to Israel. This isn't attacking Israel, Iranian nuclear facilities or using cyber war against them. Taking the documents so famously, again, touted by former Prime Minister Netanyahu from those Iranian nuclear files. This is something different. This is acting inside Iran, again, to try to use these protests in the southwestern region of Khuzestan, protests, again, that have spread to Tehran, at least in one day, and to use them as leverage to try to destabilize the regime. Calev, that's something very different than going after nuclear targets or scientists or military officials. Again, not to say that the Mossad hasn't been doing it or didn't do it, but it would be something very different. So raising the question about exactly what Israel would want to be gaining if Israel indeed is doing that. And of course, that definitely remains an if.
And Mayor, would it be different for the Iranian regime to blame the Mossad or foreign elements for domestic disturbances of the type that we've seen plenty of times before in recent history?
No, it would not be very different, Calev. They usually try to blame foreigners, especially Persian language news stations abroad, such as BBC Persian and Iran International. They also try to blame foreign countries. But, you know, recently, actually, after one of them, there have been 3 waves of unrest in Iran since November 2017. And actually, one of them, I can't remember which one of the 3 it was, they actually later on said that these were all homegrown. There was no involvement by foreign intelligence agency. To be honest with you, I really don't think you need to have foreign intelligence agencies encouraging the people of Iran to demonstrate when the taps run dry. I mean, it's one thing you have a rampant COVID problem. It's another issue when there's the inflation, which on food supplies has reached 70 or 80%. But you know, when the taps run dry, that's something completely different. What I'm trying to say, Calev, is nothing is more rage-inducing than having no water. So I think in such a situation, you don't need the Mossad to do it. I'm very skeptical of this report, and I think the Iranian regime is trying to find a way out by blaming other countries. But to bring back but to say also, to be fair, there have been people within Iran, within the Islamic Republic, who have said, look, we've created the problem of the drought in Iran because of mismanagement.
Right, and of course it's a way to deflect blame. Could be also a way to perhaps justify violent repression of these protests. We're getting more and more reports, especially out of Khuzestan, of fatalities there as security forces, it looks like, opening fire on the demonstrators there.
Yes, this is something that they've done before. They try to find justification for these things. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the overwhelming majority of the people of Iran don't buy these excuses that, you know, this was Israel, so we have to go and get the demonstrators. I think overall, the Islamic Republic realizes it's facing a severe problem because you have, on the one hand, you have people demonstrating over the issue of the drought and it's reaching other cities. Then you've also had, in parallel, people demonstrating over the lack of workers' rights. You know, I find it incredible that some progressives in the United States and some left-wingers in Europe, you know, are so silent about the Iranian regime, or sometimes even support it because of its anti-imperialism credits. But in reality, this is a very oppressive regime when it comes to issues that are very close to the progressive and the left discourse. So you have on the one hand parallel workers' rights, and now you have drought. Now the issue here is that will these two fuse together and synthesize, and that the possibility exists, and then the regime could have a serious problem on its hands, because apart from the drought, there's no way out for the economic downturn, because Iran right now, because of Khamenei's decision, is not returning to the nuclear deal.
Right. And Owen, even if it's not Israel or some foreign power behind this demonstration, certainly I don't think anybody within Israel is in the government is unhappy to see these demonstrations break out, especially coming at this sensitive time when the Israeli government is trying to make the case to the U.S., to Europe, not to renew that nuclear deal, not to do business with Iran, at a time when we are seeing trying to violently repress these demonstrations, which in part seem to be caused by, let's just say, if you want to call it persecution, of a non-Persian ethnic minority in that country.
Yeah, absolutely. No one here is shedding a tear for the Iranian regime and its plight, to say the least. On the other hand, Calev, I don't think that analysts here are overstating what this round of protests can realistically achieve. If the 2009 Green Revolution didn't bring about a real change in the regime, and if those protests back a few years ago, again, across the country, including various strata of the society, didn't bring about a change, I don't think anyone realistically believes that these protests at this point in time can really be something that destabilizes the regime. That said, over the course of time, do these continued waves of protests, does the continued strain of everything that Meir talked about, the economy, the environment, the foreign policy, and the corruption, does the continued weight of those and the cumulative weight of those problems and of the protests ultimately bring about some kind of change in the regime? Maybe, but again, I don't think people are overstating here what these protests can realistically achieve.
Mayor, just in 30 seconds, do you think these protests are going to continue or peter out in the near future?
Well, look, even if they peter out, I think they will return because, sorry to repeat myself, there's very little more rage-inducing than no water. I mean, food prices going up, COVID as bad as it is, and apparently the numbers are much higher than in Iran, which makes it even more incredible that people are demonstrating because they're not just facing the regime security forces, they're facing COVID. But I think that the drought itself, not only because the taps are running dry, it's creating land subsidence. Tehran, in 5 or 7 years, parts of it could be unlivable because of the land subsidence. And I think this is something that could make this a recurring theme.
We'll have to leave it at that, Mayor Javandan. For Owen Alterman, thank you.